welcome to PM Anonymous. Today we're going to take a look at key PM terms, project management terms that people should know about.
Yeah, well, we can start with one that's pretty easy, I think. It's a baseline. We've all heard this term before. And in the world of project management, we set up baselines as we're through with planning our projects so that as we're executing, we follow our baselines. And then as we're monitoring our project, we can compare what the baseline is or the plan against what the actual is, so we know if we need to do some preventative or some corrective action to bring the project back in line. You might have a scope baseline, a time baseline, a cost baseline. You might call it a performance baseline. It's up to you what type of baselines you want to have, but a baseline is a key term.
That's true. Baselines, they kind of help keep you on the straight and narrow, right?
Yeah.
So people often refer to their baselines as the original plan without being changed or modified. And if it's going to be modified, then it needs approval, right?
Yeah,
you need
absolutely.
approval.
What about a milestone?
A milestone, we actually covered this on a previous show. The milestones are key events in the project. They demarcate key events. So if you've had maybe a documentation review, you could have a milestone that says documentation review complete. So it signifies the completion of a key event in the project, and it has 0 duration. So if you're going to put that on your schedule, it won't show any duration. It will just be 0 duration, just to say we're done with this key event.
And with some stakeholders, this is a great report. What milestones are coming up, what have been met, what have been missed in some situations. It's a very good way to get to the point. Well, we also have a WBS. What does that stand for?
Work breakdown structure. And this term is used loosely in scheduling because people think their WBS is their schedule, but it's not, is it?
No. The WBS is 100% of the work that needs to be completed in the project. It doesn't have to be drilled down to the activity level, especially for very long projects or iterative projects. You might not have it all broken down, but it allows for you to be confident that when the time comes, you will be able to take that big chunk of work and break it down into activities or tasks that you can associate with resources. And the WBS is a wonderful foundation for your schedule, for your cost, but also to go through and actually identify what risks are evident in your project. And Phil, when I see that term risk, I think immediately, danger. Is that appropriate? Should I jump to that conclusion?
So I always give the analogy of the mouse with the cheese, but the cheese is on a trap. And imagine the little mouse with a helmet on its head. Well, in the area of risk, you could have a positive risk, the cheese, negative risk, the trap. And what approach are you going to take to address that risk? Are you going to mitigate it by reducing the impact of the trap with a helmet? Or are you going to avoid the risk altogether, just run away and say you're not going to go after the cheese? So risk could be positive risks or negative risks. And when I see that word risk, I'm thinking about, is it positive? Is it negative? Is it a huge impact? Small impact, huge probability, small probability. Is it urgent that I address it today? Because if I don't address it today, it's going to grow and grow and become bigger than what it is today. So many different parameters, need to be thought about regarding that word. It's a big word.
And I've been hearing people say de-risk a lot these days.
Oh, really?
Let's de-risk it, which means reducing the probability or reducing the impact of a negative risk, generally, when you hear that out there at large these days.
That's true. And, the funny thing is a lot of people think about the negative, but they forget about the positive, the opportunities, which are also important. And, talking about possibilities of schedule, critical path. So what's that all about?
Well, the critical path is the earliest that you can complete your project. When you set up all of the activities, when you're scheduling your project, you can determine what activities can happen simultaneously and what activities must complete before another activity can start, and you determine how long these activities will take. And very often when you use project management software, there's a view or a report that you can run, and it simply shows you the critical path. So when people say critical path, what they mean is it is the longest path of sequential activities in the schedule. And also what that means is if there's an activity that's on that critical path, it is critical to completing by that deadline. And if that activity extends beyond when it's slated to complete, then you've gone past your due date. And so by setting up your critical path and monitoring those activities, even when you just kick off your project, you're able to know how likely you are to meet that end date so that you can make preventative or corrective actions as early as you need to.
That's true. That always threw me for a loop, didn't it, Emily? Longest path,
Yeah.
shortest time. I guess they need to come to some of our classes for us to blow that out
Exactly.
in detail.
True. Now, these all kind of make up having a project plan.
That's true. Ultimately, by the time you get your baselines, and you talked about scope baseline, schedule baseline, which other baseline did you mention? Cost baseline. By the time you get all those, and you've got the WBS and the risks all identified, well, how to manage the risks identified, I should say, all of that gets filtered into a project plan. Now, people use the term project plan. I feel uncomfortable without saying project management plan, because as we know, a big standard in the world is the Project Management Body of Knowledge Guide, and they refer to a plan for managing your project as a project management plan. And they're very dogged about the word management because it's a plan for how to manage the project, not necessarily a plan for how to engineer the project or program on the project or do shadow programming on a project, but it's really about managing the project, and that's why they stick in the word management. So the project management plan is a big, big term that's used in many firms, and it's a sacred cow in the world of the PMI.
Yeah, and I think the project management plan or project plan is important because it also can identify for the project team members what your tolerance is for being over budget or behind schedule, or how you can handle changes that come into your project. So the more that you add to your project plan, the more able you are to manage your project successfully. And hopefully over time, you can use the same plan, do kind of a save as, and then tweak some items so that it doesn't take you as long as it seems like it will take you to develop your project plan. But when we look at this term, Phil, I personally look at that as a formal document that needs to be agreed upon from the project team and the sponsor and from their viewpoint.
Absolutely, that's true. In fact, if we go to a notorious page in that project management standard, name withheld, we talk about the different dimensions of this plan, and it's huge. You've got the configuration management plan, the change management plan, the requirements management plan, the scope management plan, schedule management plan, cost management plan, quality management plan, process improvement plan, human resource management plan, communications management plan, stakeholder management plan, risk management plan, procurement, oh dear, all the plans in the world.
I know.
So at the end of the day, of course, it has to be managed carefully, because if you change one bit, it affects another.
And lastly, lessons learned, which is documentation that you should take throughout your entire project so you understand what you did well, what you could do better next time.
Anyway, that's enough about plans. Should we just
yeah.
wrap this up? If you have any questions for us, anything you think we missed after all that recitation of the PMBOK Guide, well, let us know. Send an email to us, info@praizion.com, or just visit pmanonymous.com.